In the tranquil village of St. Mary Mead, a scream shatters the peace of a sunlit herb garden, where Mrs. Eleanor Ashby lies dead, poisoned by her own tea. Was it the bitter aconite from her prized garden, or a darker secret from her circle of guests? Her nervous niece Clara, the secretive Dr. Whitmore, the sharp-tongued Mrs. Gray, the calculating solicitor Mr. Finch, or the eerily calm Miss Harrow. Enter Hercule Poirot, whose little gray cells unravel a web of lies, hidden debts, and buried motives. Why was the green leather notebook stolen? What does the torn paper marked will conceal? And who was digging in the garden under cover of night? Dive into herb garden homicide. Miss Marple's edible evidence. A classic Agatha Christie-style mystery where every clue blooms with suspense, leading to a shocking, logical reveal that will keep you guessing until the final twist. Chapter 1. The scent of sage and secrets in the drowsy village of St. Mary Mead, where the air was thick with the scent of late summer roses and the hum of contented bees. The herb garden cottage stood as a quiet monument to order and beauty. Its meticulously tended beds of lavender, thyme, and rosemary framed a quaint stone path leading to a Georgian manor, home to the widowed Mrs. Eleanor Ashby. The village, nestled in the soft folds of the English countryside, was not accustomed to disruption. Yet this bright August morning carried an undercurrent of unease, as if the very herbs whispered secrets to those who paused to listen. Mrs. Ashby, a woman of 60 with a sharp eye and sharper tongue, was renowned for her herbal expertise and her annual garden fete, which drew villagers and gentry alike. Her cottage, with its ivy-clad walls and leaded windows, was a stage for her social ambitions, and the fete was her grand performance. This year, however, the gathering was smaller, more intimate, confined to a select circle of guests. Her niece, Clara Ashby, a nervous young woman of 25, Dr. Henry Whitmore, the village physician with a penchant for rare plants, Mrs. Lavinia Gray, a wealthy widow with a taste for gossip, Mr. Roland Finch, a solicitor with a sly smile, and Miss Violet Harrow, a spinster with a passion for botany and an unsettling habit of observing others too closely. The morning of the fete began with a deceptive calm. At precisely 10 o'clock, as recorded in the meticulous notes of Captain Arthur Hastings, who had been staying at a nearby inn to escape London's clamour, the guests assembled on the lawn. Hastings, a man of straightforward demeanour and unwavering loyalty to his friend Hercule Poirot, had been invited by Mrs. Ashby herself, who had once met him at a London charity event and found his tales of detection amusing. He stood now, his straw hat tilted against the sun, observing the scene with a soldier's eye for detail. Mrs. Ashby, dressed in crisp linen, moved among her guests with the grace of a hostess who knew her power. "My dears," she said, her voice carrying over the clink of teacups, "today we celebrate not just my garden but the art of cultivation, patience, precision, and a touch of ruthlessness." Her eyes lingered on Clara, who blushed and looked away, clutching a glass of lemonade. Dr. Whitmore, adjusting his spectacles, murmured something about the medicinal properties of chamomile, while Mrs. Gray's laughter rang out, sharp and artificial. Mr. Finch, standing apart, sipped his tea and watched the group with a calculating air, his fingers drumming lightly on his saucer. Miss Harrow, meanwhile, knelt by a bed of sage, her gloved hands brushing the leaves as if coaxing secrets from them. Hastings noted the time, 10:15 a.m., when Mrs. Ashby led the group on a tour of her prized herb garden. The path wound past beds labeled with neat copper plaques: Salvia officinalis, Thymus vulgaris, Rosmarinus officinalis. Each plant was a testament to her skill, but Hastings sensed a tension beneath the polite chatter. Clara seemed distracted, her eyes darting to the cottage windows. Dr. Whitmore's enthusiasm for the plants felt forced, his hands trembling slightly as he pointed out a rare strain of mint. Mrs. Gray's anecdotes grew barbed, her references to past indiscretions drawing tight smiles from the others. Finch's silence was conspicuous, his gaze fixed on Mrs. Ashby as she described her latest triumph, a hybrid rosemary with an unusually potent scent. By 11 a.m., the group had returned to the lawn for refreshments. Hastings, ever observant, noted the precise arrangement of the tea table, a silver tray with a teapot, 6 cups, a sugar bowl, and a small jug of cream, all aligned with geometric precision. A plate of scones sat beside a bowl of clotted cream and a jar of Mrs. Ashby's homemade lavender jam. The guests mingled, their voices a low hum, but Hastings caught fragments of conversation that hinted at discord. Clara whispered to Dr. Whitmore, her face pale, "You promised to help, Henry." Mrs. Gray, overhearing, raised an eyebrow and murmured to Finch, "Family secrets, Roland, or something more herbal?" Finch's reply was inaudible, but his smirk suggested knowledge he preferred to keep private. At 11:30 a.m., as recorded in Hastings' pocket notebook, Mrs. Ashby excused herself to fetch a fresh pot of tea from the kitchen. The guests continued their chatter, but a subtle shift occurred. Miss Harrow, who had been silent, suddenly remarked, "Sage is such a curious plant. Did you know it can mask the scent of other things?" Her eyes met Clara's, and the younger woman flinched. Hastings, puzzled, made a mental note of the exchange, sensing it carried weight beyond botany. 10 minutes later, at 11:40 a.m., a scream shattered the morning's calm. It came from the kitchen, where Clara had gone to assist her aunt. The guests froze, teacups poised, as Hastings sprang to his feet and hurried toward the cottage, followed by Dr. Whitmore and Finch. Inside, they found Clara kneeling beside Mrs. Ashby, who lay crumpled on the tiled floor, her face contorted in agony. A shattered teapot lay beside her, its contents pooling on the stone. The air was thick with the scent of chamomile and something sharper, more bitter. Dr. Whitmore knelt, his fingers searching for a pulse. "She's dead," he said, his voice hollow. "Poison, I'd wager. Look at her lips bluish." Clara sobbed, clutching her aunt's hand, while Finch's eyes narrowed, scanning the room. Mrs. Gray, standing in the doorway, gasped, "Murder in St. Mary Mead." Miss Harrow, last to arrive, stood silently, her gloved hands clasped, her face unreadable. Hastings, his heart pounding, stepped back to survey the scene. The kitchen was orderly, save for the broken teapot and a small vial on the counter, its label obscured by a smear of jam. A clock on the wall ticked loudly, marking the time, 11:42 a.m. He thought of his friend Hercule Poirot, whose methodical mind would find order in this chaos. "We must send for Poirot," he said aloud, his voice steady despite the horror. "He will uncover the truth." As the guests retreated to the lawn, whispering and casting suspicious glances, Hastings remained in the kitchen, his notebook open. He sketched the room's layout, the teapot's position, the vial, the window overlooking the herb garden. He noted the time of death, the guests' alibis, and the strange undercurrent of their interactions. Something in the garden, in the herbs, in the very air of this cottage, held the key to Mrs. Ashby's death, and only Poirot, with his little gray cells, could unravel it. Chapter 2. The bitter taste of death. Sun climbed higher over St. Mary Mead, casting dappled shadows through the oaks that bordered Mrs. Ashby's garden. But the warmth did little to dispel the chill that had settled over the herb garden cottage. The news of Mrs. Eleanor Ashby's death spread swiftly, carried by the hushed voices of villagers who gathered at the garden gate, their curiosity cloaked in feigned sympathy. Inside the cottage, the kitchen remained untouched, a silent tableau of tragedy. The shattered teapot, the overturned vial, and the body of Mrs. Ashby, now covered with a white sheet by Dr. Whitmore's trembling hands. Captain Hastings stood on the lawn, his notebook clutched tightly, his mind racing with questions. The guests, scattered across the grass, were a study in contrasts. Clara Ashby, pale and tear-streaked, sat on a wicker chair, twisting a handkerchief. Dr. Henry Whitmore paced near the lavender beds, muttering about toxicology. Mrs. Lavinia Gray, her lips pursed, whispered to Mr. Roland Finch, whose sharp eyes darted toward the cottage. And Miss Violet Harrow, serene as ever, examined a sprig of rosemary with unsettling detachment. The air was thick with suspicion, each guessed a piece in a puzzle Hastings could not yet solve. At precisely 12:15 p.m., as noted in his meticulous records, the local constable, Sergeant Brooks, arrived, his heavy boots crunching on the gravel path. A stout man with a ruddy face, he exuded the confidence of one accustomed to petty thefts and village disputes. But the word poison seemed to unsettle him. "Right, then," he said, mopping his brow. "Nobody leaves until we've sorted this. Dr. Whitmore, you're certain it's poison?" "Quite certain," Whitmore replied, his voice clipped, the bluish lips. "The convulsions, she was poisoned, likely within the last half hour of her life. Something swift and potent." He hesitated, glancing at the vial on the kitchen counter. "That may hold answers, but we must wait for the coroner." Hastings, observing the exchange, noted the doctor's unease. The vial, small and unassuming, bore a smudged label that read only extract in Mrs. Ashby's precise script. He longed for Porrett's presence, for his friend's ability to see beyond the obvious, to pluck meaning from the smallest detail. Fortunately, he had sent a telegram to Porrett's London flat immediately after the discovery, and he expected the detective's arrival by the afternoon train. By 1 p.m., the guests had been ushered into the drawing room, a space of polished oak and chintz curtains, where Sergeant Brooks began his inquiries. Hastings, permitted to observe as a courtesy to his reputation, stood by the fireplace, his pen poised. The sergeant's questions were blunt, lacking the finesse Hastings knew Porrett would bring. "Miss Ashby," Brooks began, turning to Clara, "you were with your aunt in the kitchen. What happened?" Clara's eyes, red-rimmed, flickered with fear. I went to help her with the tea. She was fine, chatting about the fate. Then she clutched her chest, gasped, and fell. The teapot slipped from her hands. I screamed. That's all I remember." Her voice broke, and she buried her face in her handkerchief. Brooks scribbled in his notebook. "And this vial, did you see her touch it?" "No," Clara whispered. "It was on the counter, but I don't know what it is. Aunt Eleanor was always mixing her herbal remedies." Mrs. Gray, seated on a velvet sofa, interjected with a theatrical sigh. Eleanor was far too proud of those concoctions, always brewing something, teas, tinctures, goodness knows what. She once told me her sage tonic could cure a broken heart. Ridiculous. Of course. Her eyes gleamed with malice, and Hastings noted the barb, wondering what grudge lay beneath it. Finch, leaning against a bookcase, spoke next, his tone smooth. "Mrs. Ashby was meticulous, Sergeant. If that vial contains poison, it wasn't an accident. Someone placed it there. His gaze swept the room, lingering on Clara, who flinched. Miss Harrow, seated near the window, spoke softly, her voice like the rustle of leaves. Sage, you know, can mask many scents, even those of less savory substances. Her words hung in the air, and Hastings felt a prickle of unease. Was she hinting at knowledge, or merely indulging her botanical obsession? Dr. Whitmore, standing by the door, cleared his throat. As a physician, I must point out that many herbs in this garden, foxglove, hemlock, even certain strains of nightshade, can be deadly if misused. Mrs. Ashby knew this. She was no novice. Brooks frowned, clearly out of his depth. Right? Nobody touched that vial until the coroner arrives. And I'll need your movements from 11 o'clock to 11:40 a.m. The alibis were given haltingly. Clara had been on the lawn until she joined her aunt at 11:35. Dr. Whitmore claimed to have been inspecting the mint bed, alone, from 11:20 to 11:40. Mrs. Gray said she was gossiping with Finch by the tea table, a claim he confirmed with a nod. Miss Harrow stated she had been in the herb garden, communing with the plants, from 11:15 onward. Unnoticed by others, Hastings recorded each statement, noting the gaps and overlaps, the hesitations and glances. Someone was lying. But who? At 2:30 p.m., a familiar figure appeared at the garden gate. Hercule Poirot, impeccable in his pinstripe suit, his mustache gleaming like a polished artifact. His green eyes, sharp as cut glass, surveyed the scene as Hastings hurried to greet him. Mon ami, Poirot said, his voice a soothing balm. You have stumbled into a most intriguing affair. A death in a garden of herbs. C'est magnifique. The setting is perfect for a crime of subtlety and cunning. Hastings briefed him swiftly, recounting the morning's events, the broken teapot, the vial, and the guest's strained alibis. Poirot listened, his head tilted, his fingers steepled. Bon, he said at last. The poison, it is the key, but not the only key. We must consider the hearts of these people, their desires, their fears. Tell me, Hastings, what did you observe of their manner? Hastings hesitated, then shared his impressions. Clara's nervousness, Whitmore's trembling hands, Gray's venom, Finch's calculation, Harrow's eerie calm. Poirot nodded, his eyes gleaming. Each is a thread in the tapestry, mon ami. But first, I must see the scene of the crime. They entered the kitchen, where Poirot's gaze swept over the room with the precision of a metronome. He knelt by the teapot's fragments, sniffing the air. Chamomile, he murmured, and something else. Bitter, yes, but elusive. He examined the vial, careful not to touch it, and noted the smudged label. Extract, it says. But of what? And why is the label smudged? An accident, or a deliberate act? He straightened, dusting his hands. This kitchen, Hastings, is a stage. The props are few, but they speak volumes. Poirot's attention turned to the window, which overlooked the herb garden. He peered out, his eyes narrowing. The garden, it is the heart of this mystery. Mrs. Ashby's herbs, they are not mere plants. They are motives, means, and perhaps alibis. He turned to Hastings, a faint smile playing on his lips. Come, mon ami. Let us meet these players in our little drama. I suspect they have much to hide. As they stepped back onto the lawn, the guests turned, their faces a mix of relief and apprehension. Poirot's rival had shifted the air, as if the very herbs held their breath. Hastings felt a surge of confidence. With Poirot here, the truth, however buried, would not remain hidden for long. Chapter 3. The arrival of order. The afternoon sun bathed the herb garden cottage in a golden glow, but the warmth could not penetrate the unease that clung to its walls. The villagers, now dispersed by Sergeant Brooke's stern orders, left the lawn quiet, save for the murmur of the guests in the drawing room and the distant hum of bees. Hercule Poirot stood at the edge of the herb garden, his small, immaculate figure a stark contrast to the sprawling greenery. His hands were clasped behind his back, his head tilted as if listening to the whispers of the plants themselves. Captain Hastings, standing beside him, felt the familiar thrill of watching Poirot's mind at work, a mechanism as precise as a Swiss clock. It was 3 p.m., as Hastings noted in his pocketbook. When Poirot began his examination of the garden, he moved with deliberate care, his polished shoes avoiding the soil as he inspected the beds of sage, thyme, and rosemary. "Observe, Hastings," he said, his voice low and melodic. "This garden, it is a masterpiece of order, yet it conceals disorder. Each plant is labeled, each row precise, yet something is out of place." He paused by a bed of foxglove, its tall spikes heavy with bell-shaped flowers. "Digitalis purpurea," he murmured. "Beautiful, but deadly. A source of poison, perhaps." Hastings, less versed in botany, scribbled the name in his notebook. "Do you think the poison came from the garden, Poirot?" Poirot's green eyes gleamed. "It is possible, mon ami, but we must not leap to conclusions. The poison, it is but one piece of the puzzle. The motives, the opportunities, these are what we must uncover." He turned toward the cottage, where Sergeant Brooks emerged, looking harried. "Monsieur le Sergeant," Poirot called, "have you secured the vial from the kitchen?" Brooks nodded, holding up a small evidence bag containing the vial. "Coroner's on his way, Mr. Poirot. This'll go for analysis. Label says extract, but it's smudged, like someone tried to wipe it clean." "Precisement," Poirot said, his mustache twitching. "The smudge. It is no accident. Someone wished to obscure the truth, but in doing so, they have drawn attention to it." He gestured toward the drawing room. "Let us speak with these guests, Hastings. Their words, their gestures, they will reveal more than they intend." Inside, the drawing room was a study in tension. The guests sat in a loose circle, their teacups abandoned on the sideboard. Clara Ashby, her eyes still red, clutched a cushion as if it were a lifeline. Dr. Whitmore stood by the fireplace, his fingers tapping nervously on the mantel. Mrs. Gray, perched on the sofa, fanned herself with a lace handkerchief, her expression a mix of curiosity and disdain. Mr. Finch leaned against the wall, his solicitor's composure intact but his eyes watchful. Miss Harrow sat near the window, her gloved hands folded, her face serene yet unreadable. Poirot entered with a bow, his presence commanding silence. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, his voice smooth as velvet, "I am Hercule Poirot, and I am here to uncover the truth of Mrs. Ashby's tragic death. A murder, it seems, has occurred in this charming cottage, and I assure you, the truth cannot remain hidden from the little gray cells." He tapped his temple lightly, a gesture Hastings knew was both theatrical and sincere. Sergeant Brooks, standing awkwardly by the door, cleared his throat. "Mr. Poirot's assisting folks answer his questions, and we'll get to the bottom of this." Poirot's gaze swept the room, lingering on each face. "Let us begin with the morning's events. Madame Ashby, she was in good health, yet she dies suddenly, with signs of poison. Tell me, who among you saw her last before she entered?" The kitchen. Clara's voice trembled as she spoke. I did, Mr. Poirot. I went with her at about 11:35 to help with the tea. She was, herself, cheerful, talking about the fate. Then she just collapsed. Poirot nodded, his eyes narrowing. And you, mademoiselle, did you see the vial on the counter before she fell? Clara shook her head. I didn't notice it. I was distracted. She was pouring tea, and I was fetching cups from the cupboard. Distracted, Poirot repeated softly. By what, may I ask? Clara flushed. Just nerves. The fate, all these people. I'm not used to it. Poirot turned to Dr. Whitmore, who shifted uncomfortably. Doctor, you are a man of science, familiar with poisons. What can you tell me of this vial? Whitmore adjusted his spectacles. I only saw it after she fell. It could be one of her herbal extracts. She made dozens. But poison? It could be anything. Hemlock, aconite, even digitalis from her garden. We won't know until it's tested. Indeed, Poirot said, his tone neutral. And your movements, Doctor? You were in the garden, non? Yes, Whitmore said quickly, inspecting the mint bed from 11:20 to 11:40. Alone? I'm afraid. Mrs. Gray laughed sharply. Alone. Henry, how convenient. Eleanor always said you were too fond of her plants. Perhaps you wanted a cutting of something rarer. Whitmore's face reddened. That's absurd, Lavinia. I admired her work, nothing more. Poirot's eyes flicked to Mrs. Gray. Madam, you were with Monsieur Finch at the tea table, oui? Did you see anyone approach the kitchen? Before Mademoiselle Clara. Mrs. Gray pursed her lips. No, but I wasn't watching the kitchen. Roland and I were discussing local matters. Eleanor's fate always stirred up old grudges. You know, she wasn't as beloved as she seemed. Finch's smile was thin. Mrs. Ashby had a knack for making enemies, Mr. Poirot. Her tongue was as sharp as her pruning shears. But I saw nothing unusual. I was with Lavinia until the scream. Poirot turned to Miss Harrow, who had remained silent, her gloved fingers tracing the edge of her chair. Mademoiselle Harrow, you were in the garden, communing with the plants. As you said, did you see anyone near the kitchen window? Miss Harrow's eyes met his, calm and unyielding. I was absorbed in the sage, Mr. Poirot. It's a remarkable plant, purifying, yet potent. I saw no one, but I heard voices from the kitchen. Eleanor's, and perhaps another. I couldn't be sure. Poirot's mustache twitched. Voices. You say. Yet you did not investigate. I am not one to pry, she replied, her tone cool. Plants are more honest than people. Hastings, scribbling notes, felt a chill at her words. Poirot, however, merely smiled. Merci, mademoiselle. Your observations are most enlightening. He turned to the group. Each of you, I see, has a piece of the truth, but also a shadow of secrecy. Do not fear, Ms. Amos. Hercule Poirot will bring light to these shadows. As the interviews ended, Poirot drew Hastings aside. Mon ami, what do you make of these alibis? Hastings frowned. They're vague, Poirot. No one has a solid witness for the critical time 11:30 to 11:40. And that vial, it's too convenient, sitting there like a clue in a novel. Precisement, Poirot said, his eyes gleaming. The vial is a distraction, perhaps, but the garden. Hastings, the garden holds the key. Tomorrow, we shall examine it more closely, and we shall watch these people. Their lies, they are like weeds. They will betray themselves. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the herb garden in twilight, Poirot stood alone by the foxglove bed, his silhouette sharp against the fading light. Hastings watched, knowing that his friend's little grey cells were already weaving the threads of this mystery into a tapestry only he could see. Chapter 4. The questions deepened. Morning of August 19, 1925. Dawned crisp and clear over St. Mary Mead, the herb garden glistening with dew under the early sun. Inside the herb garden cottage, the air was heavy with the scent of polished wood and lingering tension. Hercule Poirot, immaculate in his grey suit and polished shoes, sat at the dining table, a cup of tisane before him, his green eyes scanning the room with the precision of a jeweler inspecting a gem. Captain Hastings, ever his faithful shadow, stood by the window, his notebook open, recording the subtle shifts in the guests' demeanors. It was 9 a.m., as Hastings noted, when Poirot began his second round of interviews. Sergeant Brooks, looking increasingly out of his depth, had retreated to the village to await the coroner's report. Leaving Poirot to take charge, the guests, summoned back to the drawing room, sat in uneasy silence, their faces betraying a mix of fatigue and weariness. Clara Ashby, her hands trembling, clutched a glass of water. Dr. Henry Whitmore, his spectacles fogged from nervous perspiration, fidgeted with his cufflinks. Mrs. Lavinia Gray, her lips tight, fanned herself with unnecessary vigor. Mr. Roland Finch, leaning back in his chair, exuded a calculated calm, while Miss Violet Harrow, serene as ever, gazed out the window at the herb garden, her gloved fingers tracing patterns on her skirt. Poirot began with a disarming smile. "Mesdames et messieurs," he said, his voice smooth as velvet. "Yesterday, we established the stage of this tragedy. Today, we delve deeper. A murder has been committed, and the truth lies not only in what you say but in what you do not say. Let us proceed with method and order." He turned to Clara, whose eyes widened. "Mademoiselle Ashby, you were close to your aunt. Tell me of her habits, her routines. Did she often prepare her own teas and tinctures?" Clara nodded, her voice barely audible. "Yes, Mr. Poirot. Aunt Eleanor was always in the kitchen, mixing her remedies. She had a notebook, a green leather one, where she recorded her recipes. She was very particular about her herbs, their strength, their preparation." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "This notebook, where is it now?" Clara hesitated, glancing at the others. I don't know. She kept it in the kitchen, on a shelf by the window. I haven't seen it since yesterday." Hastings made a note. Green leather notebook. Missing. Poirot's mustache twitched. "Most interesting. A notebook of recipes, perhaps containing secrets. We shall look for it. Hastings." He turned to Dr. Whitmore. "Doctor, you admired Madame Ashby's herbal knowledge. Did you ever assist her in her preparations?" Whitmore's hands stilled. "Occasionally, Mr. Poirot. She consulted me on medicinal properties, dosages, effects, but I never prepared anything myself. Her methods were her own." "Indeed," Poirot said, his tone neutral. "And you, Madame Gray, you spoke of Madame Ashby's enemies. Who might have wished her harm?" Mrs. Gray's fan paused mid-flutter. "Eleanor was a difficult woman, Mr. Poirot. She had a way of uncovering secrets and wielding them like a knife. She once hinted she knew something about my late husband's business dealings, something she shouldn't have. I brushed it off, but others might not have." Finch's voice cut in, smooth and sharp. "Mrs. Ashby was a collector of secrets, Mr. Poirot. As her solicitor, I can attest she was revising her will recently. She mentioned adjustments but wouldn't elaborate. Perhaps someone feared being cut out. Clara gasped, her glass trembling. That's not true. Aunt Eleanor never said anything about changing her will. She promised me. Her voice trailed off, and she bit her lip. Poirot's gaze softened, but his question was precise. Promised. You what, mademoiselle? Clara's cheeks flushed. The cottage. She said it would be mine one day. She knew how much I loved the garden. Poirot nodded, then turned to Miss Harrow, who had remained silent, her eyes fixed on the garden. Mademoiselle Harrow, you are a botanist, non? You know the properties of these plants. Tell me, could a poison be concealed in a tea, masked by the scent of, say, chamomile or sage? Miss Harrow's lips curved faintly. Oh, yes, Mr. Poirot. Many herbs can mask others. Chamomile is soothing, but it could hide the bitterness of aconite or the sharpness of hemlock. Mrs. Ashby knew this. She was experimental. Hastings scribbled, chamomile masks poison. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Experimental, you say? Did you ever see her experiment with dangerous plants? Miss Harrow's gaze met his, unflinching. Once or twice. She showed me a tincture of digitalis foxglove for heart conditions. She was careful, but curious. Too curious, perhaps. The room fell silent, the weight of her words settling. Like dust. Poirot clapped his hands lightly, breaking the tension. Merci, Msamus. You have given me much to consider. Now, I shall examine the kitchen once more. Hastings, come. In the kitchen, Poirot moved with the grace of a cat, his eyes darting from the counter to the shelves. The broken teapot had been cleared by Sergeant Brooks, but the vial remained. In evidence, Poirot examined the shelf Clara had mentioned, finding only jars of dried herbs and a few cookbooks. No green leather notebook, he murmured. Curious, non? It is missing, yet it may hold the recipe for murder. He peered out the window, his gaze fixed on the herb garden. Hastings, note the layout. The kitchen window overlooks the foxglove bed, just there. Anyone could have reached through perhaps to place the vial, or to take something away. He tapped the sill, where a faint smudge of soil caught his eye. Soil. Mon ami. From the garden. Someone was here, perhaps. In haste, Hastings added to his notes. Soil on windowsill. Possible garden entry. Poirot straightened, his expression thoughtful. We must find this notebook, Hastings, and we must watch these people closely. Their alibis. They are like a house of cards, fragile, ready to collapse under the right pressure. As they returned to the drawing room, Poirot paused by the tea table, still set from the fete. A single teacup, overlooked by Brooks, sat slightly askew, its rim stained with a faint bluish tint. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Hastings, this cup, it is not like the others. It was used, perhaps by Madame Ashby herself. We shall have it examined. At 10:30 a.m., Sergeant Brooks returned, his face grim. Coroner's preliminary report. Mr. Poirot. The vial contained aconite monkshood. Deadly, fast-acting. Could have been mixed into her tea. But the smudged label. It's deliberate, he reckons. Poirot nodded, unsurprised. Aconite. From the garden. Perhaps. We shall see. He turned to the guests, his voice calm but commanding. Mesdames et messieurs, a poison has been identified, but the hand that wielded it remains hidden. I urge you to reflect on what you know. The truth. It will emerge, with or without your help. As the guests dispersed, their faces pale, Hastings leaned close. Poirot, do you think one of them took the notebook? Poirot's smile was enigmatic. Perhaps, moaned Ami, or perhaps it was never here. But the soil, the cup, the missing notebook, these are threads in our tapestry. We shall weave them together, and soon the picture will be clear. Outside, the herb garden lay silent, its secrets buried in the earth, waiting for Poirot's relentless logic to unearth them. Chapter 5. The Red Herring's herb garden cottage, bathed in the soft light of late morning, seemed to hold its breath as Hercule Poirot and Captain Hastings stood on the lawn, the scent of thyme and rosemary mingling with the tension that hung over St. Mary Mead. It was 11 a.m. on August 19, 1925, as Hastings recorded in his notebook, and the investigation into Mrs. Eleanor Ashby's murder was gaining momentum. The coroner's confirmation of aconite as the poison had sharpened the focus, but the missing green leather notebook and the smudged vial label pointed to a deliberate attempt to obscure the truth. Poirot, his eyes gleaming with purpose, had requested Sergeant Brooks to gather the guests once more in the drawing room. The sergeant, now visibly reliant on Poirot's expertise, complied without protest. The guests filed in, their faces a gallery of unease. Clara Ashby, her hands knotted in her lap. Dr. Henry Whitmore, wiping his spectacles with a nervous tic. Mrs. Lavinia Gray, her fan snapping shut with impatience. Mr. Roland Finch, his solicitors calm fraying at the edges. And Miss Violet Harrow, serene yet watchful, her gloved hands still as stone. Poirot stood before them, his small frame commanding the room. Mesdames et messieurs, he began, his voice a precise instrument. The poison, aconite, has been identified. It is a plant, and one that grows in many gardens, perhaps even this one. But the method of its delivery, this is what intrigues Hercule Poirot. Let us consider the teacup, the one with the bluish stain, found on the table. Who drank from it? A murmur rippled through the room. Clara's voice, tremulous, broke the silence. It must have been Aunt Eleanor's. She was pouring tea when it happened. Poirot's mustache twitched. Precisement, mademoiselle. But why only one cup with such a stain? And why was it left on the table, untouched by the good sergeant's men? His gaze swept the group, lingering on Dr. Whitmore, who shifted uncomfortably. Sergeant Brooks, standing by the door, coughed. Beg pardon, Mr. Poirot, but we assumed it was Mrs. Ashby's cup. The others were clean, stacked on the tray. We've sent it for testing. Bon, Poirot said, nodding. But assumptions, they are dangerous, non? Let us test another assumption. Monsieur Finch, you mentioned Madame Ashby's will. You suggested someone feared being disinherited. Who might that be? Finch's smile was tight. I only know what she told me, Mr. Poirot. She was considering changes, cutting out unworthy beneficiaries, she said. I assumed she meant Clara, given their recent arguments. Clara gasped, her face paling. That's a lie. We never argued. Aunt Eleanor loved me. She said the cottage would be mine. Mrs. Gray's laugh was sharp as a blade. Oh, Clara, dear, Eleanor was never sentimental. She told me you'd been pestering her for money. What with your debts from that London season? Perhaps she grew tired of it. Clara's eyes filled with tears. That's not true. I never asked for money. Poirot raised a hand, silencing the room. Enough, Ms. Amos. Accusations. They are like arrows shot in the dark. They may strike, but they reveal little. Let us turn to the garden. Mademoiselle Harrow, you were there, during the critical time. Did you see anyone near the aconite plants? Miss Harrow's eyes met his, cool and steady. I saw no one. Mr. Poirot. The aconite monk's hood, as it's called, is at the far end of the garden, near the hedge. I was by the sage, closer to the cottage, but I did notice a disturbance in the soil, as if someone had been digging. Hastings scribbled, "Disturbed soil near aconite." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "A disturbance, you say? Most interesting. And you, Dr. Whitmore, you were near the mid-bed, yet you saw nothing?" Whitmore's hands trembled. "Nothing, Mr. Poirot. I was focused on the plants. Mrs. Ashby's mint was a rare strain Mentha. I was distracted. Poirot echoed, his tone soft but piercing. Like Mademoiselle Clara. So many distractions, yet a murder was committed with precision. Curious, non? The room fell silent, the guests exchanging uneasy glances. Sergeant Brooks, sensing a shift, stepped forward. "Mr. Poirot, we've got a lead. The village chemist says Mrs. Ashby bought a small quantity of aconite extract last month for experimental purposes, she claimed. Said it was for her remedies. But he warned her it was dangerous." Poirot's expression remained impassive. "And this extract, it matches the vial." Brooks nodded. "Could be." The label smudged. But the chemist recognized the bottle type. "He's sending records." "Excellent," Poirot said. "But the vial, it is too obvious, non? A murderer does not leave such a clue unless they wish it to be found. We must look beyond it." He turned to the group. "I propose a small experiment. Let us return to the garden, where the truth may lie hidden among the herbs." The guests, reluctant but obedient, followed Poirot outside. Hastings, trailing behind, noted the time. 11:45 a.m. The garden was a labyrinth of order, each bed labeled with copper plaques. But Poirot's attention fixed on the aconite bed, tucked near a yew hedge. The tall, hooded flowers swayed in the breeze, their beauty belying their deadly nature. Poirot knelt, examining the soil. "Voyez, Hastings," he said, pointing to a patch of disturbed earth, freshly turned, as Mademoiselle Harrow observed. "Someone has been here, perhaps to harvest, perhaps to conceal." He stood, brushing his hands. "Mesdames et messieurs, I ask you to recall your movements precisely. The soil, it does not lie. Someone was here, and they left a trace." Mrs. Gray's fan snapped shut. "This is absurd, Mr. Poirot. Are you accusing us of digging in the dirt like common gardeners?" Poirot's smile was enigmatic. "Not accusing, madam. Observing. The garden, it speaks." And Hercule Poirot listens. As the guests returned to the cottage, whispering among themselves, Poirot drew Hastings aside. "Mon ami, the aconite, the vial, the disturbed soil, these are red herrings, designed to mislead. The true clue lies elsewhere, in the hearts of these people. Clara's tears, Whitmore's nerves, Gray's malice, Finch's secrets, Harrow's calm, they are all pieces of the puzzle." Hastings frowned. "But the vial?" "Poirot's proof of poison." "Oui. But proof of what?" Poirot replied. "A murderer does not leave their weapon in plain sight unless it serves a purpose. We must find the notebook, Hastings, and we must watch for the slip the moment when the mask falls." As the sun climbed higher, casting shadows across the garden, Hastings felt the weight of the mystery deepen. Poirot, however, seemed invigorated, his little gray cells already sifting through the lies, poised to uncover the truth hidden in the scent of herbs and the stains of a single teacup. Chapter 6. A clue in the details. The afternoon sun hung low over St. Mary Mead, casting long shadows across the herb garden cottage's meticulously ordered beds. It was 2:30 p.m. on August 19, 1925, as Captain Hastings recorded in his notebook, and the air was thick with the mingled scents of lavender and suspicion. Hercule Poirot stood by the aconite bed, his polished shoes just shy of the disturbed soil, his green eyes scanning the garden with a hawk's precision. The guests, dismissed after the morning's tense interrogation, had retreated to their respective corners of the cottage, but their unease lingered like a fog. Hastings, standing beside Poirot, felt the weight of the case pressing upon him. The aconite vial, the missing notebook, the stained teacup, and now the disturbed soil all pointed to a crime of calculated cunning. Yet the pieces refused to align. Poirot, he ventured, do you think the soil was disturbed to hide evidence, or to plant something new? Poirot's mustache twitched, a sign of his mind at work. An excellent question, mon ami. The soil. It tells a story, but we must read it carefully. The aconite. It is too obvious, non? A murderer who leaves such a clue wishes to direct our gaze. We must look where they do not expect. He turned toward the cottage, his gaze settling on the kitchen window. Come, Hastings. Let us examine the scene once more. Inside the kitchen, the air was cooler, the scent of chamomile, and that faint, bitter undertone still lingering. The broken teapot had been removed, but Poirot's attention fixed on the counter where the vial had been found. He crouched, inspecting the surface with a magnifying glass produced from his waistcoat pocket. Voyez, Hastings, he said, pointing to a faint smear of green residue near the sink. This is not jam, nor is it dirt. It is herbal, perhaps, a trace of something. Crushed, ground fine. Hastings leaned closer, noting the observation. Green residue on counter. Possibly herbal. Could it be from one of Mrs. Ashby's mixtures? He asked. Perhaps, Poirot replied, straightening. But why here, and not with her other ingredients? And why so faint? As if someone tried to wipe it away. His eyes darted to the shelf where Clara had mentioned the green leather notebook. He ran a finger along the edge, finding a thin layer of dust disturbed in one spot, as if something had been recently removed. The notebook, Hastings. It was here, and now it is gone. Someone took it, and they did so with purpose. Before Hastings could respond, a soft knock interrupted them. Miss Violet Harrow stood in the doorway, her gloved hands clasped, her expression serene yet piercing. Mr. Poirot, she said, her voice like a breeze through leaves. I thought you should know. I found something in the garden this morning, near the sage bed. It may be nothing, but Poirot's eyes gleamed. Nothing is nothing, mademoiselle. Show me. They followed her to the garden, where she pointed to a small, crumpled piece of paper half buried in the soil near the sage. Poirot knelt, carefully, extracting it with a handkerchief. It was a torn fragment, no larger than a postage stamp, with a single word in Mrs. Ashby's precise script. Will. Hastings' heart quickened as he noted it. Torn paper, word will, found in sage bed. Poirot held the fragment to the light, his expression unreadable. Most interesting, Mademoiselle Harrow. And you found this? When? Just after breakfast, she replied. I was inspecting the sage. It's been wilting. You see, I thought it odd. This paper. So I left it for you to find. Left it, Poirot repeated, his tone neutral. You did not touch it, then? No, she said, her eyes steady. I know better than to disturb evidence. Poirot nodded. pocketing the fragment in his handkerchief. "Merci, mademoiselle. You have been most helpful." As she walked away, he turned to Hastings, his voice low. "She is clever. This one. Too clever, perhaps. Why find this now, and not yesterday? And why leave it for us to find?" Hastings frowned. "Do you think she's hiding something, Poirot?" "Everyone hides something, mon ami," Poirot said, his eyes narrowing. "But Mademoiselle Harrow, she watches, she listens. She is like the sage she admires, subtle, yet potent." Returning to the drawing-room, Poirot gathered the guests once more. The fragment of paper lay on the table, a silent accusation. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, "a clue has emerged, a torn piece of paper, bearing the word will. It was found in the sage bed, where Mademoiselle Harrow was yesterday. Who among you knows of this?" Clara's eyes widened. "Aunt Eleanor's will? But Mr. Finch said she was changing it. Could it be from that?" Finch's jaw tightened. "I told you, Mr. Poirot, she mentioned adjustments, but I never saw a new will. That fragment could be anything, a note, a list." Mrs. Gray's fan snapped open. "Or a threat, Roland. Eleanor loved her little games. Perhaps she tore up something to taunt someone." Dr. Whitmore, pale, adjusted his spectacles. "It's irrelevant, surely. A single word means nothing without context." Poirot's smile was enigmatic. "On the contrary, Doctor, a single word can mean everything. This will, it suggests motive, someone feared a change, or sought to ensure one." His gaze lingered on Clara, who looked away, her hands trembling. Hastings, watching closely, noted the time, 3:15 p.m. The room felt stifling, the guests' alibis and accusations tangling like weeds. Poirot clapped his hands lightly. "Enough for now. I shall reflect on this clue, and we shall meet again. But be warned, amidst the truth. It is like a plant. It grows, and it cannot be hidden forever." As the guests dispersed, Poirot drew Hastings aside. "Mon ami, the fragment. It is a distraction, yet it is also a key. The word will, it points to motive, but whose? And the green residue, the missing notebook, these are the details that will unravel this mystery." Hastings nodded, his mind racing. "What next, Poirot?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "We search, Hastings, for the notebook, for the truth in the garden, and for the moment when one of these players betrays themselves. The little gray cells. They are at work, and they will not rest until the picture is complete." Outside, the herb garden lay silent, its secrets buried in the earth. But Poirot's relentless logic was beginning to unearth them, one delicate clue at a time. Chapter 7 lies in tangled weed shrub garden cottage, bathed in the muted light of late afternoon on August 19, 1925. Seemed to pulse with secrets as the shadows lengthened across its manicured beds. Captain Hastings, standing on the lawn at 4 p.m., as noted in his ever-present notebook, felt the weight of the investigation like a storm gathering on the horizon. The discovery of the torn paper fragment bearing the word will had stirred the guests, their guarded expressions betraying cracks in their composure. Hercule Poirot, his suit as immaculate as ever, stood by the kitchen window, his green eyes fixed on the herb garden, where the aconite bed glowed faintly purple in the fading light. Inside the drawing-room, the guests had reassembled at Poirot's request, their faces a tableau of unease. Clara Ashby sat rigid, her handkerchief crumpled in her fist. Dr. Henry Whitmore, his spectacles slipping down his nose, avoided eye contact, his fingers twitching. Mrs. Lavinia Gray, her fan now still, wore a look of calculated indifference, while Mr. Roland Finch's solicitor's calm seemed strained, his lips pressed into a thin line. Miss Violet Harrow, as always, sat apart, her gloved hands folded, her gaze drifting to the garden as if it held answers only she could see. Poirot began with a disarming smile, his voice smooth and deliberate. Mesdames et messieurs, the threads of this mystery grow ever more tangled, yet the truth, it begins to emerge, like a seedling breaking through the soil. The fragment of paper, the word will, it suggests a motive tied to inheritance, to secrets Madame Ashby held close. But there are other secrets, none. Let us uncover them. He turned to Mrs. Gray, whose eyes narrowed. Madam, you spoke of Madame Ashby's knowledge of your late husband's affairs. What precisely did she know? Mrs. Gray's fan flicked open, a defensive gesture. Eleanor was a meddler, Mr. Poirot. She claimed to have letters correspondence between my husband and a business associate. She hinted they were compromising, but she never showed them. I thought it was just her way of asserting power. Poirot's mustache twitched. Letters, you say? Most interesting. And where might these letters be? I've no idea. Mrs. Gray snapped. She probably made it up to torment me. Poirot's gaze shifted to Mr. Finch. Monsieur, as Madame Ashby's solicitor, you handled her legal affairs. Did she mention such letters, or perhaps a safe where she kept sensitive documents? Finch hesitated, his fingers drumming lightly on his knee. She had a small safe in her study, Mr. Poirot. I never saw its contents, but she was particular about it. Said it held her legacy. I assumed it was her will. Perhaps some family papers. Hastings scribbled. Safe in study. Possible letters. Poirot nodded, then turned to Clara. Mademoiselle, your aunt promised you the cottage. Yet Monsieur Finch suggests she was reconsidering her will. Did she ever mention a safe? Or these letters? Clara's voice was barely a whisper. She never spoke of letters, Mr. Poirot. The safe, I knew about it, but she never let me near it. She said it was private, for after, her voice broke, and she looked away. Poirot's eyes softened, but his question was sharp. After what, mademoiselle? Clara flushed. After she was gone. She said I'd understand one day. Dr. Whitmore, silent until now, cleared his throat. This is all speculation, Mr. Poirot. Eleanor was private, yes, but she wasn't malicious. Those letters, if they exist, could be irrelevant, or they could be everything, Poirot countered, his tone calm but unyielding. And you, Doctor, you spent much time with Madame Ashby, discussing her herbs. Did she ever share her concerns about anyone in this room? Whitmore's face paled. She mentioned Clara's debts once. Said she worried about her niece's future, but nothing specific. Clara's head snapped up. That's not true. I told you. I never asked for money. Poirot raised a hand, silencing the outburst. Calm, mademoiselle. The truth. It reveals itself in these moments of discord. He turned to Miss Harrow, who had remained quiet, her eyes fixed on the garden. Mademoiselle, you spoke of hearing voices in the kitchen before the scream. Can you recall anything more? A word, a tone? Miss Harrow's lips curved faintly. I heard Eleanor's voice, sharp, as if arguing, and another lower, perhaps a man's. But it was faint, Mr. Poirot. The sage bed is some distance from the window, Hastings noted. Voices in kitchen, possibly male. Before scream. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Merci, mademoiselle. Your memory, it is like your plans precise, yet full of hidden depths. The tension in the room was palpable, each guest eyeing the others with suspicion. Poirot clapped his hands lightly. Bon, we have uncovered much, but there's more to find. I shall inspect the safe, with Monsieur le Sergeant's permission, and I urge you all to reflect, what did Madame Ashby know that made her a target? As the guests dispersed, Poirot and Hastings followed Sergeant Brooks to the study, a small room lined with books and botanical sketches. The safe, a modest iron box, sat behind a portrait of a stern-faced Ashby ancestor. Brooks, with a key provided by Finch, opened it, revealing a stack of papers, a velvet pouch of jewelry, and most notably no green leather notebook. Poirot sifted through the papers, his fingers deft. Wills, deeds, a few letters, but none of the kind Madame Grey described. He murmured, "Yet the notebook, it is not here. Curious, non?" He paused, lifting a single-sheeted draft of a will, dated 2 weeks prior, naming Clara as the primary beneficiary but with a handwritten note in the margin, to be revised. Hastings' heart quickened as he noted, "Draft will, Clara beneficiary, marked for revision." Poirot. This supports Finch's claim. She was changing her will. Perhaps, Poirot said, his tone enigmatic. Or perhaps this is another thread in our tapestry, designed to mislead. The notebook. Hastings, it is the key. It holds her secrets, her recipes, perhaps her suspicions. As they left the study, Poirot paused by the kitchen window, his gaze returning to the garden. The voices, the soil, the missing notebook, these are not separate mysteries, mon ami. They are one. Someone in this house knows more than they say, and they are growing careless. Outside, the herb garden lay silent, its secrets buried deeper than the roots of the aconite. But Hastings knew Poirot's little grey cells were already untangling the lies, drawing closer to the truth that lay hidden among the tangled weeds of motive and deceit. Chapter 8. The Breaking Point. The herb garden cottage, cloaked in the soft twilight of August 19th, 1925, seemed to hold its breath as the day drew to a close. The air was heavy with the scent of lavender and the unspoken fears of its inhabitants. Captain Hastings, standing in the drawing-room at 6:30 p.m., as noted in his meticulous notebook, felt the tension coil tighter, like a spring ready to snap. Hercule Poirot, his silhouette sharp against the fading light, stood by the fireplace, his green eyes scanning the guests with a quiet intensity that belied his calm demeanor. The discovery of the draft will, the missing notebook, and the faint traces of herbal residue had deepened the mystery, and now a crack was forming in the facade of the suspects. The guests, summoned once more, sat in a strained circle. Clara Ashby, her face pale and drawn, clutched a glass of water, her fingers trembling. Dr. Henry Whitmore, his spectacles fogged, wiped them repeatedly, his hands betraying his nerves. Mrs. Lavinia Gray, her fan discarded, sat rigid, her eyes darting between the others. Mr. Roland Finch, his solicitor's composure fraying, leaned forward, his jaw tight. Miss Violet Harrow, serene as ever, gazed out the window at the darkening garden, her gloved hands still, but her lips pressed into a thin line. Poirot began, his voice a soothing balm laced with steel. "Mesdames et messieurs, we approach a turning point in this affair. The threads of this mystery, the aconite, the teacup, the missing notebook, the torn paper begin to weave together. But it is the human heart, with its passions and fears, that will reveal the truth. Tonight, I ask you to speak plainly, for the weight of silence grows heavy. He turned to Clara, whose eyes widened with apprehension. Mademoiselle, you loved your aunt, yet you conceal something. Your distress. It is more than grief. What did Madame Ashby know that caused you such fear? Clara's glass slipped, splashing water onto her lap. I don't know what you mean, Mr. Poirot. She stammered. She was kind to me, always. I told you, she promised me the cottage. Yet the draft will suggest she wavered. Poirot said gently. And your debts, Mademoiselle Madame Grey mentioned them. Were they a source of tension between you? Clara's face crumpled, and she buried her head in her hands, her voice breaking. She knew about my debts. Yes. I spent too much in London, trying to fit in. She was disappointed, but she never threatened to cut me out. She wanted to help me. Mr. Poirot, she said she'd pay them off, but only if I promised to stay here, to care for the garden. Hastings scribbled. Clara's debts. Mrs. Ashby offered to pay. Poirot's eyes gleamed. And did you promise, Mademoiselle? Clara nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. Yes, but I overheard her talking to Mr. Finch last week. She said something about protecting the legacy. I thought she meant the cottage, but now I'm not sure. Poirot turned to Finch, whose fingers had stilled. Monsieur, you were her solicitor. This legacy, what did Madame Ashby mean? Finch's smile was tight. She was vague, Mr. Poirot. She spoke of preserving her work, her garden, her recipes. I assumed it was about the will, but she never showed me a new draft, only the one you found. Mrs. Grey's voice cut through, sharp and accusatory. Oh, Roland, don't play coy. Eleanor was always hinting at secrets, mine, yours, everyone's. Those letters she mentioned about my husband, they weren't a bluff. I saw her with them once, in her study, reading them with that smug look of hers. Poirot's head tilted. And you, madam, did you ever try to retrieve these letters? Mrs. Grey flushed. I thought about it, but no. I wouldn't stoop to sneaking about her study. Besides, she kept that safe locked tight. Dr. Whitmore, silent until now, spoke up, his voice unsteady. This is all nonsense, Mr. Poirot. Letters, wills, it's a distraction. The poison came from the garden, from her own experiments. Maybe it was an accident. Poirot's gaze was piercing. An accident, doctor, with aconite, so precisely. Administered. This was no mistake. And you, who spent hours with Madame Ashby, discussing her plants, did you ever see her work with aconite? Whitmore's hands trembled. Once. Yes, she showed me a tincture she was testing for heart conditions, she said, but she was careful, meticulous. She wouldn't have poisoned herself. Miss Harrow's voice, soft as a whisper, broke the silence. Careful, yes, but curious. Eleanor was always pushing boundaries, blending herbs in ways others wouldn't dare. She once asked me about aconite's properties, how quickly it acts, how little is needed. I thought it odd, but she was so confident. Hastings noted. Mrs. Ashby asked Harrow about aconite. Poirot's mustache twitched. Most interesting, Mademoiselle. And when was this conversation? A month ago, Miss Harrow replied, her eyes meeting his. In the garden, by the aconite bed. She seemed preoccupied. The room fell silent. The weight of Clara's confession and Harrow's revelations settling like dust. Poirot clapped his hands lightly. Bon, we have peeled back a layer of lies, but more remain. The notebook, the letters, The safe, these are pieces of the puzzle. But the heart of this crime lies in what was feared, what was coveted. I urge you, reflect on your secrets. They will not remain hidden. As the guests dispersed, Clara lingered, her face streaked with tears. Mr. Poirot, she whispered, I didn't tell you everything. Last week, I saw someone in the garden at night, near the aconite bed. I couldn't see who, but they were digging. Poirot's eyes narrowed. And you did not mention this before, mademoiselle. I was scared, she admitted. I thought it might be nothing, but now, I'm not sure. Hastings scribbled. Clara saw someone digging at night. Aconite bed. Poirot nodded, his expression grave. Merci, mademoiselle. Your courage. It is noted. Go now, and say nothing of this to the others. As Clara left, Poirot turned to Hastings, his voice low. Mon ami, the cracks are forming. Clara's confession, it is the first break, but others will follow. The figure in the garden, the missing notebook, these are not accidents. Someone is desperate, and desperation breeds mistakes. Outside, the herb garden lay in twilight, its shadows deepening. Hastings felt a chill, knowing that Poirot's relentless logic was closing in on the truth, peeling away the lies like petals from a flower, revealing the dark heart beneath. Chapter 9. The Trap is set. Evening of August 19, 1925. Draped the herb garden cottage in a velvet darkness, broken only by the soft glow of lanterns on the lawn. Inside, the drawing room was a crucible of tension, the air thick with the scent of wax and the unspoken fears of its occupants. Captain Hastings, standing by the fireplace at 8 p.m., as recorded in his notebook, felt the atmosphere crackle with anticipation. Hercule Poirot, his silhouette as precise as a cameo, stood at the center of the room, his green eyes gleaming with the quiet confidence of a hunter closing in on his prey. Clara's revelation about the figure in the garden had shifted the investigation, and Poirot was ready to apply pressure to the suspects' fragile facades. The guests, summoned for what Poirot called a little gathering of minds, sat in a tense semicircle. Clara Ashby, her eyes red-rimmed but resolute, clutched a shawl around her shoulders. Dr. Henry Whitmore, his spectacles glinting in the lamplight, sat rigid, his hands clasped tightly. Mrs. Lavinia Gray, her usual bravado subdued, toyed with a pearl necklace, her lips pressed thin. Mr. Roland Finch, his solicitor's calm now a brittle mask, leaned back, his eyes darting to the others. Miss Violet Harrow, serene as ever, sat by the window, her gloved hands folded, her gaze fixed on the darkened garden. Poirot began, his voice a velvet blade. Mesdames et messieurs, we stand at the precipice of truth. A murder has been committed, and the clues: the aconite, the teacup, the missing notebook, the torn paper point to a mind both cunning and desperate. Tonight, I shall lay a trap, not with force, but with the mirror of truth. One of you knows more than you have said, and that knowledge will betray you. He paced slowly, his hands clasped behind his back. Let us review. Madame Ashby died of aconite poisoning, administered in her tea. Between 11:30 and 11:40 a.m. the vial, with its smudged label, was a destruction. Yet it confirms the poison's source. The notebook, her repository of recipes and perhaps secrets, is missing. The torn paper, bearing the word will, suggests a motive tied to inheritance. And now, Mademoiselle Clara tells us of a figure digging in the garden, near the aconite bed, under cover of night. Who was this figure, and what did they seek? A murmur rippled through the room. Mrs. Gray's necklace snapped, a pearl rolling across the floor. This is theatrical nonsense, Mr. Poirot, she said, her voice sharp. You're accusing us all without proof. Poirot's smile was enigmatic. Not accusing, madam. Observing. The proof. It lies in your reactions, your silences. Let us test this. Monsieur Finch, you spoke of Madame Ashby's will. Did you know of her safe's contents beyond the draft we found? Finch's jaw tightened. I told you, Mr. Poirot, she was secretive. I knew of the safe but not its full contents. If there were letters, as Mrs. Gray claims, I never saw them. Poirot turned to Dr. Whitmore, whose hands trembled. Doctor, you were close to Madame Ashby, discussing her herbs. Did she ever speak of a threat, someone who feared her knowledge? Whitmore's voice was hoarse. No, never. She was proud of her work, but she didn't confide in me about enemies. I only helped with her experiments. Experiments, Poirot repeated, his eyes narrowing. With aconite, perhaps. Whitmore flushed. No, I told you. She showed me a tincture once, but I never touched it. Poirot's gaze shifted to Miss Harrow. Mademoiselle, you heard voices in the kitchen. Man's, perhaps, and you found the torn paper in the sage bed. Tell me, did you see anyone else in the garden that morning, before the scream? Miss Harrow's eyes met his, calm but guarded. No one, Mr. Poirot. The garden was quiet, save for the voices. I was focused on the plants. Poirot nodded, then turned to Clara. Mademoiselle, your sighting of the figure in the Whodunit is most significant. Can you recall any detail? A shape? A sound? Clara's voice trembled. It was dark, Mr. Poirot. But I think they wore a coat, a long one. I heard a faint rustle, like leaves or paper. Hastings scribbled. Figure in long coat, rustling. Sound, aconite bed. Poirot clapped his hands lightly. Bon. Now, let us consider the notebook. It is missing, yet it holds the key to Madame Ashby's secrets. I propose a search of this cottage, with Sergeant Brooks' permission. If one of you has it, or knows where it is, now is the time to speak. The room fell silent, the guests exchanging wary glances. Sergeant Brooks, standing by the door, nodded. Go ahead, Mr. Poirot. I'll supervise. The search began, methodical and thorough. Poirot, Hastings, and Brooks combed the study, kitchen, and guest rooms, while the suspects waited under the watchful eye of a constable. In Mrs. Ashby's bedroom, Poirot paused by a small writing desk, its surface cluttered with botanical sketches. He lifted a sketch of foxglove, revealing a faint indentation in the blotter beneath a rectangular shape, roughly the size of a notebook. Hastings, Poirot murmured. The notebook was here, recently. See the mark. It is fresh, the ink of the blotter undisturbed elsewhere. Hastings noted. Notebook indentation in bedroom desk. The search yielded no notebook, but in Dr. Whitmore's coat pocket, tucked in a guest room, Brooks found a small key, its brass gleaming. What's this, Doctor? Brooks asked, holding it up. Whitmore single quotes as face paled. I don't know. It's not mine. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Yet it was in your coat, Doctor. A key, perhaps to a lock we have not yet found. He turned to the group, now reassembled. Mesdames et messieurs, the trap is set. This key, the indentation, the figure in the garden, these are the threads that will unravel this crime. I give you one final chance to confess, before the truth is laid bare. Mrs. Gray's voice was shrill. This is outrageous. You're hounding us, Mr. Poirot, with no proof. Poirot's smile was serene. The proof, madam, is in your fear. Tomorrow we shall gather again, and the truth will emerge as surely as the sun rises over this garden. As the guests dispersed, their faces pale, Hastings leaned close. Poirot, do you think the key is to the safe? Perhaps, Poirot replied, his voice low. Or perhaps it unlocks something else, a secret, a motive. The little grey cells, they are at work. Mon ami. Tomorrow we shall see who breaks under the weight of their lies. Outside, the herb garden lay shrouded in darkness, its secrets whispering in the night breeze. But Poirot's trap was closing, and the truth was nearer than ever. Chapter 10. The revealed morning of August 20th, 1925, dawned with a crisp clarity over St. Mary Mead. The herb garden cottage bathed in sunlight that seemed to mock the darkness of its secrets. At 9 a.m., as Captain Hastings recorded in his notebook, the drawing room was filled with an electric tension. The guests assembled for what Hercule Poirot had promised would be the unraveling of the mystery. The air was heavy with the scent of polished wood and the faint, lingering aroma of herbs wafting through the open window. Poirot stood at the center of the room, his small frame commanding, his green eyes sharp as they surveyed the circle of suspects. Clara Ashby, pale and trembling, Dr. Henry Whitmore, his spectacles glinting with nervous sweat, Mrs. Lavinia Gray, her hands clenched, Mr. Roland Finch, his solicitor's calm shattered, and Miss Violet Harrow, serene yet watchful, her gloved hands still. Mesdames et messieurs, Poirot began, his voice a precise instrument. We have reached the moment of truth. A murder has been committed, and the clues, the aconite, the stained teacup, the missing notebook, the torn paper, the key have led us to this point. Hercule Poirot has seen through the shadows, and now, with the little grey cells, I shall reveal the killer. A gasp rippled through the room. Sergeant Brooks, standing by the door, nodded for Poirot to proceed. Hastings, his pen poised, felt his heart race, knowing Poirot's dramatic reveals were as meticulous as they were startling. Let us reconstruct, Poirot said, pacing slowly. Madame Eleanor Ashby died at 11:40 a.m. on August 18th, poisoned by aconite in her tea. The vial, with its smudged label, was found on the kitchen counter, a deliberate clue to mislead. The teacup, stained blue, was hers, but the poison was not in the teapot, it was in the cup itself, applied with precision. The missing notebook, her repository of herbal secrets, was taken to conceal a motive. The torn paper, bearing the word will, pointed to inheritance. The disturbed soil near the aconite bed suggested tampering. And the key, found in Dr. Whitmore's coat, unlocks the truth. He turned to Clara, whose eyes widened. Mademoiselle, you loved your aunt, but you were burdened by debts. She promised you the cottage. Yet the draft will suggested doubt. You saw a figure in the garden, digging at night. Why did you not speak sooner? Clara's voice trembled. I was afraid, Mr. Poirot. I thought it might implicate someone I cared about. Poirot nodded, then faced Dr. Whitmore. Doctor, you were close to Madame Ashby, discussing her herbs. You knew of aconite's dangers, and the key in your coat suggests access to her secrets. Why was it there? Whitmore's face paled. I swear, I don't know how it got there. I never touched her safe, or her notebook. Mrs. Gray's voice was sharp. Don't lie, Henry. Eleanor trusted you too much. You were always hovering over her plants, her recipes. Poirot raised a hand. Patience, madam. Your own secrets letters about your husband's dealings gave Madame Ashby power over you. Did you fear her knowledge? Mrs. Gray flushed. I resented her. Yes, but I didn't kill her. Poirot turned to Finch. Monsieur, you knew of her will's revision. Did you stand to lose, or perhaps gain, by her death? Finch's jaw tightened. I had no stake in her will, Mr. Poirot. I was her solicitor, nothing more. Finally, Poirot faced Miss Harrow. Mademoiselle, your calm is remarkable. You heard voices, found the torn paper, and know the garden's secrets. Why did you ask Madame Ashby about aconite? Miss Harrow's eyes met his, unflinching. Curiosity, Mr. Poirot. She was reckless with her experiments. I warned her. Poirot clapped his hands, the sound sharp. Enough. Let us end this charade. The murderer is among you, and the truth lies in the details. The key, found in Dr. Whitmore's coat, does not fit the safe. It fits a small lockbox in Madame Ashby's bedroom, hidden beneath the floorboards. I found it this morning, with Sergeant Brooks' aid. Inside was the green leather notebook. A collective gasp filled the room. Hastings scribbled, "Notebook in lockbox, found." Poirot continued, producing the notebook, its green cover worn but intact. This contains her recipes and a list of secrets. Madame Ashby knew of Clara's debts, Mrs. Gray's husband's fraud, Finch's undisclosed commission for selling the cottage, and Dr. Whitmore's indiscretion with a patient, which she threatened to expose. Whitmore's face crumpled. She wouldn't have. I begged her to stay silent, but she did not know, Poirot said, his voice rising, of Mademoiselle Harrow's secret. You, Mademoiselle, were her rival, obsessed with her garden, her knowledge. You asked about aconite, not out of curiosity, but to plan. You were the figure in the garden, digging to harvest aconite roots. You slipped the poison into her teacup during the fete. When all were distracted, you took the notebook to hide your inquiries about aconite, recorded in her notes, and planted the key in Dr. Whitmore's coat to shift suspicion. Miss Harrow's calm shattered, her hands trembling. That's absurd. I loved the garden, not her secrets. Poirot's eyes were relentless. You loved it too much, Mademoiselle. The notebook records your questions, your visits to the aconite bed. The soil on the windowsill matches your gloves, stained with green residue. You tore the paper with will to mislead us, but it was from a botanical note, not her will. You killed her to claim her garden, her legacy. Miss Harrow rose, her face pale. No, she faltered, then sank back, her voice breaking. She was going to sell the cottage to developers. She told me last week. I couldn't let her destroy it. The room erupted in murmurs. Sergeant Brooks stepped forward, handcuffs ready. Miss Harrow, you're under arrest. Poirot's voice softened. The garden, it was your motive, Mademoiselle. But murder, it is never the answer. As Brooks led Harrow away, the guest sat stunned. Hastings, his notebook trembling in his hands, leaned close. Poirot, how did you know? Poirot smiled faintly. The little gray cells, mon ami. They see the pattern, the obsession, the precision, the lies. The garden spoke, and I listened. Outside, the herb garden lay silent, its secrets laid bare under the morning sun, as Poirot's logic brought justice to the heart of St. Mary Mead. Chapter 11. The reflection. The morning sun of August 20th, 1925, filtered through the leaded windows of the herb garden cottage, casting a soft glow over the drawing room, where the air still hummed with the aftershock of Hercule Poirot's revelation. It was 10:30 a.m., as Captain Hastings noted in his pocketbook, and the guests, now diminished by Miss Violet Harrow's arrest, sat in a subdued silence. Clara Ashby, her face pale but composed, clutched a handkerchief, her eyes fixed on the floor. Dr. Henry Whitmore, his spectacles polished to a gleam, sat rigidly, as if trying to erase his own shame. Mrs. Lavinia Gray, her usual sharpness blunted, toyed with her pearl necklace, her gaze distant. Mr. Roland Finch, his solicitor's mask restored, leaned back, but his fingers betrayed a faint tremor. The weight of truth hung heavy, and Poirot, standing by the fireplace, seemed to absorb it all with his quiet, contemplative presence. Mesdames et messieurs, Poirot began, his voice soft yet resonant, the tragedy of Madame Eleanor Ashby's death is resolved, yet its echoes remain. The little grey cells have done their work, and justice, it is served. But Hercule Poirot does not rejoice in such victories, for they reveal the frailty of the human heart. Let us reflect, so that we may understand. Hastings, his pen poised, felt a familiar awe at Poirot's ability to weave philosophy from the threads of crime. The detective's green eyes swept the room, lingering on each face. Miss Harrow. She was consumed by her passion for this garden, a passion that turned to obsession. She saw Madame Ashby's plan to sell the cottage as a betrayal, not just of her work, but of the very plans she cherished. In her mind, murder was a defense of beauty, of order. Yet, in taking a life, she destroyed the very harmony she sought to preserve. Clara's voice, barely audible, broke the silence. Mr. Poirot, did she really believe she could save the garden by doing this? Poirot's gaze softened. Oui, mademoiselle. The human mind, it can twist even the purest motives into darkness. Miss Harrow saw herself as the guardian of Madame Ashby's legacy, but she failed to see that true legacy lies not in the earth, but in the lives touched by kindness, by trust. Mrs. Gray's lips tightened. Eleanor wasn't kind, Mr. Poirot. She hoarded secrets, my husband's letters, Clara's debts, Henry's mistakes. She used them to control us. Poirot nodded, his mustache twitching faintly. It is true, madam. Madame Ashby was not without fault. She wielded knowledge like a weapon, and in doing so, she sowed the seeds of her own destruction. But consider this, her secrets, they were her shield, her way of protecting her world. It is a pity she did not use them to build bridges instead. Dr. Whitmore cleared his throat, his voice hoarse. I should have spoken up, Mr. Poirot. She knew about my error with a patient. I thought she'd expose me, but maybe she just wanted me to be better. Perhaps, Dr. Poirot said gently. We all carry burdens, but it is how we bear them that defines us. You, Monsieur Finch, knew of her will, her plans. Did you not sense her fear? Finch's jaw tightened. She was cautious, Mr. Poirot, but not afraid. I thought her talk of revising the will was just her way of keeping control. I never imagined it would lead to this. Poirot's eyes gleamed. And yet, it did. The will, the notebook, the garden, they were all symbols of power, of legacy. Miss Harrow saw that power slipping away and acted to seize it. But power, Ms. Amos, is fleeting. It is the truth that endures. Hastings scribbled. Poirot reflects on motives, legacy. He leaned closer, whispering, Poirot, do you think Miss Harrow acted alone? Poirot's smile was enigmatic. Oui, mon ami. Her actions were her own, driven by her obsession. The clues, the soil, the key, the notebook all pointed to her hand. But the others, they contributed in their silence, their secrets. Each played a part in the tapestry of this tragedy. Sergeant Brooks, standing by the door, coughed. Mr. Poirot, the coroner's final report confirms it aconite. In the teacup, traces on Miss Harrow's gloves. She's confessed to harvesting it, to slipping it into the cup during the fete. Said she meant to scare Eleanor. But it went too far. Poirot nodded, his expression grave. A confession. It is the final thread. She sought to protect, but she destroyed. Such is the paradox of the human heart. He turned to the group, his voice rising slightly. Mesdames et messieurs, I leave you with this. The garden, it is beautiful, but it is not worth a life. Cherish what grows in your heart's love, trust, forgiveness. These are the true legacies. As the guests rose, their faces heavy with reflection, Poirot gestured to Hastings. Come, mon ami. Our work here is done. Let us leave this place to heal. Outside, the herb garden lay serene. Its beds of sage and rosemary bathed in sunlight. Poirot paused by the aconite bed, his eyes thoughtful. Hastings, he said softly, the garden, it will bloom again, under kinder hands. But we must move on, to the next puzzle, the next truth. Hastings nodded, closing his notebook. As they walked down the stone path, the village of St. Mary Mead seemed to exhale, its secrets laid bare, its peace restored by the relentless logic of Hercule Poirot's little grey cells. Chapter 12. The Echoes of Truth. The afternoon sun of August 20th, 1925, hung low over St. Mary Mead, casting a golden sheen across the herb garden cottage and its now quiet herb beds. At 2 p.m., as Captain Hastings recorded in his notebook, the air carried a sense of closure, though the scars of the recent tragedy lingered. The arrest of Miss Violet Harrow had lifted the veil of suspicion from the other guests. Yet the revelations of their secret sclera's debts, Dr. Whitmore's indiscretion, Mrs. Gray's husband's fraud, and Mr. Finch's hidden commission left an uneasy stillness. Hercule Poirot, ever the orchestrator of order, stood on the lawn, his polished shoes gleaming, his green eyes reflecting a quiet satisfaction tempered by melancholy. Hastings, standing beside him, felt the weight of the case settling into memory. The cottage, once vibrant with Mrs. Ashby's presence, now seemed a hollow shell, its garden a silent witness to her demise. Poirot, he ventured, do you think the village will ever forget this? Poirot's mustache twitched faintly. Non, mon ami. A village such as St. Mary Mead, it holds its memories like the roots of these herbs deep, enduring. But with time, they will grow around the pane, and the garden will bloom anew. He gestured toward the cottage, where the remaining guests were preparing to depart, their bags packed under Sergeant Brooks' watchful eye. Inside, the drawing room was nearly empty, its chintz curtains drawn back to let in the light. Clara Ashby stood by the tea table, her face softened by a tentative resolve. Dr. Whitmore, gathering his medical bag, exchanged a quiet word with Mr. Finch, who nodded curtly. Mrs. Gray, her pearl necklace repaired, adjusted her hat with a forced air of dignity. The absence of Miss Harrow was palpable, her serene presence replaced by the weight of her confession. Poirot entered, his presence drawing their attention. Mesdames et messieurs, he said, his voice calm but resonant, before you leave, permit Hercule Poirot a final word. The truth has been uncovered, the guilty brought to justice. But the echoes of this crime, they linger in your hearts. You each carried secrets, and Madame Ashby's knowledge of them made her a target. Learn from this. I implore you. Secrecy breeds mistrust, and mistrust, it breeds tragedy. Clara stepped forward, her voice steady despite her pallor. Mr. Poirot, I I want to keep the cottage, the garden, and Eleanor loved it, and I want to honor that. Not her secrets. Will you help me ensure it's not sold? Poirot's eyes softened. Mademoiselle, your heart is in the right place. Monsieur Finch, as the solicitor, can assist with the legalities. The draft will, it favors you. And with Miss Harrow's confession, there's no challenge to your claim. Finch nodded, his expression subdued. I'll see to it, Miss Ashby. Mrs. Ashby's intentions, at least in part, were clear. The cottage is yours. Mrs. Gray's voice was sharp, but less venomous. And those letters about my husband, Mr. Poirot, are they to be made public? Poirot shook his head. None, madam. The letters, if they exist, were not found in the safe or the lockbox. Perhaps Madam Ashby destroyed them, or perhaps they were never more than a threat. Let them rest, as she does. Dr. Whitmore cleared his throat. His face flushed. I owe you thanks, Mr. Poirot. You could have exposed my mistake, but you didn't. I'll make things right. I swear it. Poirot's gaze was steady. Do so, Doctor. Not for me, but for yourself. The little gray cells. They see not only crime, but the chance for redemption. As the guests began to leave, Hastings noted the time. 2:45 p.m. Sergeant Brooks approached, his ruddy face weary but grateful. Mr. Poirot, you've done us a service. The coroner's report is final aconite, just as you said. Miss Harrow's to be charged. The village owes you. Poirot waved a hand. Non, Monsieur le Sergeant. I owe the truth, nothing more. But I confess, this garden, it has charmed me. Its order, its beauty, it reminds me that even in chaos, there is symmetry. Outside, Poirot paused by the sage bed, where Miss Harrow had found the torn paper. He knelt, touching the soil lightly. Hastings, he said softly, this garden, it was her motive, but also her undoing. The sage, it purifies, yet it could not cleanse her guilt. Hastings frowned. Poirot, do you ever feel regret solving a case like this? She loved the garden so much. Poirot stood, brushing his hands. Regret, none. But sorrow, oui. The human heart, it is complex, mon ami. Miss Harrow's love was true, but twisted. We solve not to condemn, but to restore order. And now we leave this place to heal. As they walked down the stone path, the village of St. Mary Mead seemed to stir, its quiet rhythm resuming. The herb garden, bathed in sunlight, stood as a testament to both beauty and betrayal, its secrets now laid bare by Poirot's relentless pursuit of truth. Chapter 13. The Gardens, Keyperth, late afternoon of August 20th, 1925. Bathed the herb garden cottage in a warm, golden light, the herb beds casting long shadows across the stone path. At 4 p.m., as Captain Hastings recorded in his notebook, the village of St. Mary Mead seemed to exhale, its rhythm slowly returning after the storm of Mrs. Eleanor Ashby's murder. The arrest of Miss Violet Harrow had closed the case, yet the cottage and its garden remained a focal point of whispered conversations. Among the villagers, Hercule Poirot, his grey suit pristine despite the day's exertions, stood by the rosemary bed, his green eyes reflective as he surveyed the scene. Hastings, ever at his side, sensed a quiet resolve in his friend, as if the detective were tying the final knot in the tapestry of this mystery. Inside the cottage, Clara Ashby stood alone. In the kitchen, her hands tracing the counter where the fatal teacup had rested. The other guests, Dr. Whitmore, Mrs. Gray, and Mr. Finch, had departed for their homes or the village inn. their secrets exposed but their lives spared further scrutiny. Sergeant Brooks had returned to his station, the coroner's report filed, and the village was beginning to heal. Yet Clara, now the cottage's heir, seemed burdened by more than grief. Poirot and Hastings joined her, the detective's presence a steady anchor in the quiet room. "Mademoiselle Ashby," Poirot began, his voice gentle yet precise. "The garden, it is yours now, as your aunt intended, but I sense you carry a weight beyond her loss. Speak, if you will, and let Hercule Poirot assist." Clara's eyes, red-rimmed but clear, met his. "Mr. Poirot, I feel responsible. If I'd told Aunt Eleanor about the figure I saw in the garden that night, maybe she'd still be alive. And now, this cottage, the garden, it's all I have of her. But it feels tainted." Poirot's mustache twitched, a sign of empathy rather than amusement. "Non, mademoiselle. The garden, it is not tainted. It is a living thing, a legacy of beauty and care. Your aunt's mistakes, Miss Harrow's crime, these do not diminish its worth. You must be its keeper now, with courage and kindness." Hastings scribbled, "Clara to keep garden, feels guilt." He glanced at Poirot, marveling at his ability to offer solace without softening the truth. Clara nodded, her shoulders straightening. "You're right, Mr. Poirot. I'll stay. I'll tend the garden, make it something Aunt Eleanor would be proud of. No more secrets, no more threats." Poirot smiled faintly. "Bon, that is the spirit of true order, mademoiselle. And the notebook, her recipes, her knowledge, it is yours to use wisely. Study it, but let it guide, not control." Clara clutched the green leather notebook, retrieved from the lockbox, her fingers tracing its worn cover. "I found something in it this morning, Mr. Poirot. A note, tucked inside, in her handwriting. It said, 'For Clara, my true heir. Keep the garden, keep the truth.' She knew, didn't she? She knew someone might hurt her." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Oui, mademoiselle." Madame Ashby was perceptive, perhaps too much so. "Her note. It is her final gift to you, a charge to protect what she loved, without her flaws. You will honor it, I am certain." Hastings noted. Note in notebook. Mrs. Ashby's message to Clara. He leaned closer to Poirot, whispering, "Do you think she suspected Miss Harrow?" Poirot's gaze drifted to the garden visible through the window. "Perhaps, mon ami. Or perhaps she sensed the danger of her own power, her secrets, her control. She was a woman who cultivated not just herbs, but influence. It was her strength and her downfall." They stepped outside, where the herb garden lay serene, its beds of sage, thyme, and rosemary glowing in the afternoon light. Poirot paused by the aconite bed, now cordoned off by Sergeant Brooks' orders. "This plant," he said softly, "it is beautiful, yet deadly. Like the human heart, it holds both creation and destruction. Miss Harrow forgot this balance. But you, Mademoiselle Clara, will not." Clara joined them, her expression resolute. "I'll remove the aconite, Mr. Poirot. It's too dangerous. I want the garden to heal, not harm." Poirot nodded approvingly. "A wise choice, mademoiselle. Let it be a place of peace." As they walked down the stone path, the village stirring around them, Hastings felt a sense of closure. The cottage, the garden, and Clara herself were poised for renewal, free from the shadows of murder and deceit. "Poirot," he said, "you've done it again. You've brought order to chaos." Poirot's smile was wistful. "Order? Yes, mon ami. But the heart, it is never fully tamed. We do what we can, and we move on. He adjusted his hat, his eyes scanning the horizon. Come, Hastings. London awaits, and with it, perhaps, another puzzle for the little grey cells. The herb garden, bathed in the fading light, stood as a silent promise of new beginnings, its keeper ready to nurture its beauty. Guided by the truth Poirot had uncovered. Chapter 14. The legacy restaurant evening of August 20th, 1925, settled over St. Mary Mead with a gentle calm. The herb garden cottage glowing softly under the first stars. At 7 p.m., as Captain Hastings noted in his faithful notebook, the village seemed to breathe easier, its rhythm restored after the upheaval of Mrs. Eleanor Ashby's murder. The herb garden, once a stage for tragedy, now stood as a symbol of hope, its beds of lavender and thyme whispering of renewal. Hercule Poirot, his grey suit immaculate despite the day's events, stood on the lawn, his green eyes reflecting the twilight as he prepared to depart. Hastings, ever his loyal companion, felt a quiet satisfaction, tempered by the bittersweet weight of the case's resolution. Clara Ashby, now the undisputed keeper of the cottage, stood at the garden gate, her silhouette framed by the fading light. The green leather notebook, clutched in her hands, was a tangible link to her aunt's legacy, its pages filled with recipes and wisdom she was determined to honor. The other guests, Dr. Whitmore, Mrs. Gray, and Mr. Finch, had left St. Mary Mead, their secrets exposed but their lives spared further judgment. Sergeant Brooks had returned to his duties, the village settling back into its quiet routines. Yet Clara's resolve to preserve the garden gave the cottage a renewed purpose. Poirot approached her, his step light but deliberate. "Mademoiselle Ashby," he said, his voice warm yet precise, "you have chosen a path of courage. The garden, it will thrive under your care, free from the shadows of the past. But tell me, are you at peace?" Clara's eyes, clear now of their earlier fear, met his. "I think so, Mr. Poirot. The notebook, it's more than recipes. Aunt Eleanor wrote about the garden's history, her dreams for it. She wanted it to be a place of healing, not control. I'll make that true." Poirot's mustache twitched with approval. "Bon, mademoiselle. You have learned what she did not. That power lies not in secrets, but in sharing beauty. The note she left you, it was her redemption, her hope for you." Hastings scribbled, "Clara to honor garden's healing legacy." He glanced at Poirot, marveling at his friend's ability to see beyond the crime to the human heart. "Poirot," he said softly, "do you think the village will trust the garden again, after all this?" Poirot's gaze drifted to the herb beds, their outlines softened in the dusk. "With time, mon ami. The garden, it is innocent, a creation of nature. Mademoiselle Clara will show them its heart, and they will come to love it as she does." Clara hesitated, then spoke. "Mr. Poirot, there's one thing I don't understand. Why did Miss Harrow think killing Aunt Eleanor would save the garden? She must have known it would only bring ruin." Poirot's eyes gleamed with a quiet sadness. "Mademoiselle, the mind, it can be a labyrinth. Miss Harrow saw the garden as her own, a reflection of her soul. When Madame Ashby spoke of selling, it was as if her own existence was threatened. She acted not from logic, but from a passion twisted by obsession. The little grey cells, they see this, but they cannot always prevent it." Clara nodded, her expression thoughtful. "I'll make sure it's never about obsession again. I'm planning a new fate, Mr. Poirot, a real one, for the village. To share the garden, not control it." Poirot's smile was genuine. "A splendid idea, mademoiselle. You will be the gardener not only of plants, but of trust. Hercule Poirot approves. As they walked toward the village, where a car waited to take them to the station, Hastings noted the time. 7:30 p.m. The cottage stood behind them, its windows aglow, a beacon of renewal. Poirot, he said, this case, it feels different. Not just solving a crime, but restoring something. Oui, mon ami, Poirot replied, adjusting his hat. Each case, it is a puzzle, but some leave behind more than justice. This garden, it will grow again, stronger for the truth we have uncovered. And we carry its lesson with us to cultivate order, but also compassion. The car rolled through the quiet lanes of St. Mary Mead, the herb garden fading into the twilight. Hastings closed his notebook, feeling the weight of the case lift, replaced by a sense of hope. Poirot, gazing out the window, seemed already to be turning his thoughts to the next challenge, his little gray cells ever restless, ever seeking the symmetry of truth. Chapter 15. The quiet departure at the twilight of August 20th, 1925, enveloped St. Mary Mead in a serene hush. The herb garden cottage standing as a quiet sentinel under the emerging stars. At 8 p.m., as Captain Hastings recorded in his notebook, the village seemed to have reclaimed its gentle rhythm. The echoes of Mrs. Eleanor Ashby's murder fading into the soft rustle of leaves. Hercule Poirot, his gray suit as impeccable as ever, stood at the garden gate, his polished shoes catching the last glimmers of daylight. Hastings, beside him, felt a sense of completion. The case's resolution leaving behind a village poised for healing and a garden ready to bloom anew. Under Clara Ashby's care, Clara stood on the cottage's stone path, the green leather notebook tucked under her arm, her face lit with a quiet determination. The herb garden, its beds of lavender, thyme, and rosemary glowing faintly in the dusk, seemed to mirror her resolve. The aconite bed, now marked for removal, was a reminder of the tragedy, but also of the renewal she promised. The villagers, though still whispering of the murder, had begun to look to Clara with cautious hope, drawn to her pledge to make the garden a place of community and healing. Poirot turned to her, his green eyes warm with approval. Mademoiselle Ashby, he said, his voice a gentle cadence, you have taken up a mantle not only of plants, but of trust. The garden, it will be your legacy, and I have no doubt it will flourish. Hercule Poirot wishes you strength and wisdom. Clara smiled, a flicker of her aunt's spirit in her eyes. Thank you, Mr. Poirot. Your faith in me, it means more than I can say. I'll make the garden a place for everyone, not just for secrets. The fate next spring it will be a new beginning. Hastings scribbled. Clara plans spring fete. Garden for community. He glanced at Poirot, struck by the detective's ability to see not just the crime, but the potential for redemption. Poirot, he said quietly, you've given her more than justice. You've given her purpose. Poirot's mustache twitched, a rare hint of modesty. Non, mon ami. The purpose was always hers. I merely cleared the weeds from her path, so the little gray cells could show her the way. They turned to leave, the car waiting to take them to the station for the London train. Clara raised a hand in farewell, her silhouette framed by the cottage's warm glow. Mr. Poirot, Captain Hastings, she called, if you're ever in St. Mary Mead, the garden will welcome you. Poirot bowed, a graceful gesture. Merci, mademoiselle. Perhaps one day I shall return to see your work in bloom. Adieu. As the car wound through the village's narrow lanes, Hastings closed his notebook, the weight of the case settling into memory. The herb garden cottage faded into the distance, its secrets laid bare, its future bright with promise. Poirot, he said, this case, it's one we'll remember, isn't it? Not just for the murder, but for what came after. Poirot's eyes gleamed, fixed on the road ahead. We, Hastings, each case, it is a story not only of crime, but of humanity. This one, it reminds us that even in the darkest soil, something beautiful can grow. The garden, it will endure, as will the truth. The stars above St. Mary Mead twinkled, a quiet testament to the order Poirot had restored. As the car sped toward London, Hastings felt a pang of nostalgia, but also a certainty that Poirot's little grey cells would soon find another puzzle, another truth to uncover in the intricate tapestry of human lives.